All right, welcome to this new event organized by the Global Supply Chain Council. My name is Max Henry from the organization. I'm very pleased to have you, all of you joining us from all over the APAC region. Also, we have people from the Middle East and Europe joining this session today. So as some of you are regular to our events and you know what we are doing, we cover pretty much all the topics in supply chain, and we're always very interested to bring a senior leader from one company to actually do a case study and share with us in a bit more details what they're doing. And today we're very pleased again to bring Pieter Pennings, who is the VP of Supply Chain and Sustainability at Pandora. Pieter is based in Bangkok and he's been in Asia actually for quite some time, since 2012. And he's been working extensively in supply chain. I will let him introduce himself. But before he gets started, I also want to remind all of you that this session is going to be interactive. So if you have any question for Pieter, you can make use of the Q&A. There's a question mark button located at the bottom of the screen. You can click on it and then ask your question at any time. So after the PowerPoint done by Pieter, which will last for about 20-25 minutes, we will take those questions one by one, and then of course we'll try to spend as much time as we can on the Q&A part as well. This session is being recorded, so if you're arriving late or anything, don't worry. You'll be able to watch the replay, and this will be posted again on chain.net within the next 24 hours. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Pieter Pennings from Pandora to give us a presentation about what they do at within Pandora in terms of supply chain transformation, and also take your question. Welcome, Pieter. Make sure to unmute here.
Perfect. Thank you.
Oh, good.
Also, really appreciated inviting me over of sharing about our transformation in supply chain. As you said, in the next 20-30 minutes, I run through the journey we made in transforming our supply chain and moving into the use of more sustainable materials. By all means, I normally present in front of people, so make use of the Q&A to drop your questions and draw out the presentations. I would love to hear any of your questions while presenting about our journey. So what I will do is basically three parts. I will give a brief background about Pandora, also to explain a bit on where Pandora is on their sustainability journey and why sustainability is important to Pandora. Links to our business strategy, which I think is quite important if you want to drive any sustainability agenda. And then obviously spend some time on how we actually make the change we did over the last couple of years. So if I would jump straight into the essence of the case study today, if you look at Pandora, we are the largest jewelry manufacturer in the world by volume, as some of you might know, and we mainly produce in silver. So one of the transformations we did is we moved all of our silver from non-recycled to be 100% recycled a year ago, and that helped us to drive significantly reducing our carbon emissions. So if you look at a charm, a typical product of Pandora, it now has the same carbon footprint of a latte. The second material where we made a big transformation in the last couple of years is the introduction of lab-grown diamonds. That industry in itself has evolved quite significantly, and Pandora actually has stepped into the technology development in that space to move away from any natural stones and go full in with man-made stones, including the introduction of lab-grown diamonds. And here you see that the emissions of a lab-grown diamond is roughly 5% of that of a natural diamond. So two materials which are at the core of Pandora as a company, and by making this transition, we also help to drive down our overall carbon emissions baseline. A brief introduction about myself. My name is Pieter Pennings. As Max said, throughout my career, always in supply chain operations, specific roles across different industries, FMCG, electronics before I moved into the jewelry space. I started my career after an engineering study in management consulting with Deloitte, and since then had held several functional leaderships throughout supply chain. Since 2012 in Southeast Asia, I started in Malaysia and then via Vietnam landed up in Thailand back in 2017, where I joined Pandora eventually in 2020. And since the last 3 years in my current role, overseeing the supply chain and also have sustainability under my responsibilities. At the snapshot, Pandora, we are proudly saying that we are the world's largest jewelry brand by volume. If you look at Pandora, some of the key figures, it's a Danish company, hence revenue is projected in Danish kroner. It's roughly $4 billion in revenue. We have 37,000 people globally. I will come back a bit on our employee landscape later. Close to 7,000 stores worldwide. We operate in 100 countries. Close to 1 billion visitors online as well as offline. And the main part of today's story is that we moved into using 100% recycled silver and gold in our jewelry since 2024. On an annual basis, we are producing 130 million or over 100 million of pieces of jewelry. And that translates into selling every second 3 pieces globally. So, as said, proudly saying that we are the world's largest jewelry brand by volume. And I think the scale also will come back later into the presentation. So, if you would look at the company, and before looking into our current business model, historically, Pandora is a relatively young company. It started in 1982 with a Danish goldsmith, starting a very small store back in Denmark, grew gradually, made his first steps into manufacturing in Southeast Asia, in Thailand, in the early 90s. And the company really grew with the introduction of their charms and carrier bracelets. Since then, the company has grown significantly towards 2016, 2017. At that point, we saw that there was a downturn, volumes declined. We had a reorganization back in 2019, and since then have seen significant growth. And we see that there are 3 main core competitive advantages of Pandora. The first one being the brand. Over the last 4 or 5 years, the company has invested heavily in elevating the brand, and we're aiming to be known as a full jewelry brand. Besides the brand, we also craft at scale, and that means that close to all of our products are being manufactured in-house, of which by far the majority out of Thailand, where I'm located, as Max said. We operate with 3 factories. We are opening up a 4th one next year in Vietnam, and that gives us the advantage of scale. So we have close to 13,000 craft people every day producing close to over 100 million pieces per year. And then besides crafting or manufacturing at scale, we also have an extensive distribution network with 7,000 stores, which gives us the skill to operate and drive in what we want to be, which is the world's largest jewelry brand, but also playing into the accessible jewelry space. In terms of products, we can split our offerings roughly in 2 parts. The core, which are the charms and carriers, as I just alluded to, introduced in the early 2000s, and that was for Pandora the starting point of growing as a company and growing to what it is today. And then as part of the introduction I just alluded to of the new strategy back in 2019-2020, we are focusing on what we call Fuel It More. So the idea is to introduce new products which help to continue our growth over the years and who support our core platform of the charms and the carriers. One thing I will zoom in a bit later in the presentation is our introduction of Pandora lab-grown diamonds, which is one of the examples of where we introduce new offerings in what we do. And this also has a nice connection driving with what we are trying to do with our sustainability agenda. Then sharing a bit about the strategy, because I think our strategy is kind of the fundament of why we went after sustainability and why we choose to make the transformation as we did in that part over the last 4 or 5 years. So if you look at Pandora, our purpose, our vision is we give a voice to people's loves by offering jewelry with a meaning. So the idea behind the designs we are making is that there's a meaning to express and to give a voice to people's loves. Then if you look at our strategy, it's combined of growth. So the objective was to see how can we grow the brand by elevating our brand, being recognized as a full jewelry brand, by elevating the way we make our designs, focused on core markets, and also introduce the concept of personalization. But besides the growth areas, we also have our values, which are very important to what we do on a day-to-day basis. We dream, we dare, we care, and we deliver. And then the foundation. And sustainability was for the first time in the new strategy introduced back in 2020, fundamental part of our long-term strategy in the foundation. So if you look at the sustainability agenda at Pandora, we basically have 3 main strategic priorities. The first one is that we want to drive becoming a low carbon business. This is similar what you see in a lot of other companies, driving and evaluating the carbon footprint and finding ways how can we lower that. So here we have committed to the reduction of 50% across our scope 1, 2, and 3 by 2030 against our 2019 baseline. The circular innovation relates to the recyclability. So silver being one of our main materials, but there's still others. We are looking into ways of how we can implement circular innovation, how we can actually use recycled materials. And then last one touches on becoming an inclusive, diverse, and creating a fair culture. This is looking at diversity in our organization and our leadership functions, as well as topics like human rights, also in our extended supply network. So zooming in on the transition we've made for recycled silver and gold. And here it's linking back to the strategy. So we've said in the strategy, we want to make sure that we can drive the perception of our brand. We are operating in the affordable jewelry segment, where we see that our customer base is typically the younger generations, which find sustainability very important, and there's a bigger ask for companies to drive sustainability, as well as the value I alluded to, and one of the values is we dream, we dare. And that's actually what happened back in 2020. So back in 2020, there was no such things as 100% recycled silver or gold value chains. But we said within the next 5 years, we want to make this transformation. We want to work within our own operations as well as with our suppliers and suppliers of our suppliers to completely change sourcing of silver and gold to become 100% renewable. So one of the main reasons why we choose and we started with silver and gold is that it's by far the most used material in our jewelry. It's roughly 80% of what we use in our production. So it made sense to start with that. We are already starting to look at what can we do with our remaining materials we have in our production to also drive the circular innovation I just alluded to. The second point on why we made this bold statement back in 2020 is that it became obvious that not only our consumers, but I think at a wider scale, people are expecting companies like Pandora to drive the sustainability agenda and also to contribute to the overall reduction of carbon emissions. So moving from non-recycled to recycled silver actually helps to reduce carbon emissions quite significantly. And then the last part is that when we went out and we made this bold statement to say by 2025 we want to have the supply chain transformed, we wanted to make sure that we went for, at that point, the highest standard. So also to avoid that any comments about greenwashing or about what actually we made a change. We made sure that we, from a certification and from a standard perspective, we went for the most stringent in terms of what can be seen as using recycled silver and gold versus what is not recycled silver and gold materials. So in terms of the journey, we started with understanding what is out there in terms of value chains, and then we learned quite quickly that there was no such thing as sourcing recycled silver and gold. So we basically had to start from scratch in setting standards in terms of what is it what we are after, what are the expectations, and how do we make sure that we set the right standard when it comes to claiming recycled silver and gold. Here we've set a standard which is not only applying to ourselves, but as I said, also important to the suppliers and the suppliers of our suppliers. One of the main challenges of coming to 100% recycled silver and gold in our finished products is, of course, that we need to make sure that the entire value chain is joining the transition and that we can start sourcing recycled materials from the very beginning of our value chain. So in 2021, and with the communication of making this transition happen by 2025, we made sure that we selected the most stringent standard we went after, and also internally we made sure that everyone was on the same page in terms of what does it mean, also from a cost perspective, but because it comes with a slightly higher cost if you want to source the recycled materials. Then we started by looking in-house. So if you would look at our value chain, basically we buy raw material in the shape of silver grains, which we use in our own in-house production to manufacture jewelry pieces. But we also buy already semi-finished components from suppliers. Roughly 50-50 in terms of volume split. So the first step we set is everything what we use in our in-house production, we want to transition that to become recycled silver and gold. And we reached that milestone in the second half of 2022. The main suppliers we had to work here were our refineries, because we needed to make sure with them that one, they would be able to adhere to the standards which we together agreed and set. And two, they also need to help us predict with the growth we saw for Pandora, that the access to actually scrap materials and making sure that there are sufficient sources they could use to source recycled scrap silver and gold to recycle it was sufficient in the long term. That was also very important. Once you go out and you communicate that you go for 100%, of course you can't backtrack. So you need to make sure that you can stick to this on the long run. Then once we had made the transformation internally, we looked at our suppliers, and roughly 40 suppliers which provide components to us had to be brought on the journey. The challenge here is that if you make a commitment, you know very well what happens in your own building and in your own operation. So it's easier to understand how complicated it is or not to make this transition. If you do that with your suppliers, you are, of course, dependent on the maturity level as well as the willingness and commitment of your suppliers to join you on this journey. And here I think the most challenging part was twofold. One, we had to operate with different suppliers in our network in terms of a maturity level as well as a size. So some larger companies, of course, had more resources to make this happen, whereas we need to support our smaller suppliers to also join our journey on this. That's one. Two, we made the biggest transformation or the biggest move volume-wise by transforming our in-house operations. But the majority of the work since 2022 was actually to make sure that all of our suppliers, until the last small part we are sourcing, made the transition. So it's kind of the long tail of the materials you are sourcing. You need to make sure that you also make that transition happen before you can go out and communicate externally of reaching this milestone. And then In early 2024, we actually were able to announce that we completed the transition, and from that moment onwards, we only sourced 100% recycled silver and gold, which was 1 year ahead of plan. It then took roughly another 6 to 9 months to flush our inventory. So since Q3, Q4 2024, we are actually also now producing with 100% recycled silver and gold, and we've completed that transition. And as I said earlier, we've now completed this transition for silver and gold, and we started to look at what can we do for other materials into the future. I will now have a short video just recapping also what we have done in terms of the journey, and also giving examples of what it means in terms of the reductions we realized in the emissions. So this was the part of recycled silver and gold, and the next part will be touching on the diamonds. And then in the meantime, Max, let me know if there's any questions or right, how we also are doing on time.
There are a lot of questions already, but we can keep them after the presentation. No worries, you can go ahead.
Perfect. So then moving to the second material where we made the transition, and it's lab-grown diamonds. And here I think it's important to connect back to the strategy, and it will also be one of my ending conclusions on why we are doing this sustainability agenda. I think it's important to realize that, as I said, Pandora is operating in the accessible jewelry space. We proudly say that we are the world's largest jewelry manufacturer by volume, and our strategy nicely touches on also the sustainability agenda by introducing diamonds. And that's also, again, if I move to the next part, give me 1 second. Yeah, here we are. So if you again go back into the history of Pandora, the founder of Pandora back in the 1980s said he wanted to democratize jewelry. That's also one of the reasons why Pandora is primarily operating in silver and not in gold jewelry, because of course you can offer more accessible jewelry, lower price points. The same thing actually happened when we saw that there was a development in the space of lab-grown diamonds. So back in 2020, 2021, there was kind of a technology advancements in the field of lab-grown diamonds, which made it for the first time available to buy lab-grown diamonds at jewelry quality. And one of the reasons why Pandora stepped into going for lab-grown diamonds was not only from a sustainability perspective, as said, right? It's like 5% of the carbon emissions of a natural diamond. So that's one, but also because it links back to kind of the history of Pandora and willing to democratize jewelry. In this case, we wanted to democratize diamonds to make it accessible for everyone. And that's what you see here. It was one of our marketing campaigns to emphasize the fact that we want to make it affordable and accessible to everyone. And then the last part is from a brand perspective. It was important, or it is important to Pandora to, of course, stay with the roots of being the charms and carrier as a foundation, but also to grow our core with more introductions and to move towards a full jewelry brand. So here, the drive of sustainability nicely combines with where do we want to go as a business from a strategy perspective, as well as where do we come from a roots perspective. So the journey in terms of lab-grown diamonds is that we launched a small pilot in the UK back in 2021. Very exciting. I mean, from a supply chain perspective, I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people in the call who find it interesting to look at inventory planning, forecast, and optimize that. But this was for me and the team quite interesting because it was a new material, a new industry, and no one really know how to operate, how to set it up. So we launched it with a small pilot to test the market and understand how it would fit with whatever Pandora is doing. And we also connected back to the sustainability agenda, saying from the moment we launch products with lab-grown diamonds, we want to make sure that we use lab-grown diamonds which are only grown with 100% renewable energy. That's one. And we made sure that whatever we produced was already with recycled silver and gold. So although our total transition of recycled silver and gold was only realized in 2024, we made sure that from day one, when we introduced lab-grown diamonds, that they already were produced with recycled silver and gold. So that was the pilot back in 2021. A lot of learnings. As I said, very exciting because it was from a supply chain perspective new to all of us, also from a consumer-facing perspective. But we learned a lot what worked, what didn't work, before we moved into Pandora's largest market, which is North America, and there we made sure that we took some initial learnings before we scaled up our offerings. So that was the main focus in 2020. Then thereafter we gradually launched in other markets, as well as we started to add a wider collection. So we gradually grew our offerings in the lab-grown diamond space. And then since last year, we see that also again from a demand perspective, what really works well for Pandora is basically the segment with the smaller stones, so the 1 carat and down. Also from a pricing point perspective, so here we accelerated the designs with the Malay stones, which are the larger diamond-sized stones, to all of our markets, and also we opened up stores in Denmark offering lab-grown diamonds, including our newly opened flagship store. So here, in terms of, as I said, a very exciting journey because new to Pandora, lab-grown diamonds is still very much in development. There's a lot of technology advancement over the last couple of years, which sees the quality really going up in terms of what you can offer, as well as prices are continue to come down, which makes it, of course, more accessible also for a wider group of people. I have a small video which explains very high level on how actually lab-grown diamond is produced. I will play it. If there's any questions, obviously ask at the end of the presentation. So what you just saw at a very high level is basically how a lab-grown diamond is created. Is you start with a small sheet under a high pressure, high temperature room, which basically simulates the same thing what happens to a natural diamond in the earth. You grow a square rough within roughly 4 weeks of time, and thereafter it follows exactly the same process as for natural diamonds. A rough is being cut and polished to the right size and dimensions as you want it, and then put in jewelry, as I said, similar to what you have for natural diamonds. So that makes that we have reached the end of the presentation. I summarized 3 main parts where I think what makes a difference to be successful in this transition. I think the first one, very important, as I also said in my presentation, it's not that we went after a sustainability objective standalone, but from a company perspective, from a brand perspective, it really made sense that the transition not only helped with reducing our carbon emissions, but also elevated our brand as we want, which also is indirectly supporting our growth strategy. Then the second point, which I think is not only related to sustainability transformations, but to anything in what you do, very important that there was executive sponsorship of driving this. I think for many initiatives, this is a no-brainer, you need it, but I think for sustainability it's even more important because there's not always per se a financial trade-off or business case to justify what we are doing. Hence, it's important that there's sponsorship to drive this forward from an understanding the bigger picture of why are we doing this. And then, of course, the last part, we made sure that we leverage our scale. You can imagine that setting out a statement of we want to transform a value chain within 4 or 5 years. It helps if you are a large player in there, and therefore you can also make sure that your entire supply network joins you on the journey, and also make sure that you can support them to realize this ambition. So that it is for today. I would say open up the floor for any questions, and obviously thank you for your time to listen to our journey.
Yeah, thank you very much, Peter. Very interesting presentation. Fascinating to see how Pandora is committed to sustainability. Very, very interesting. Obviously, we have a lot of questions, but I also want to remind for those who have been joining us a little bit later that you can still ask questions. And if you miss part of the presentation, we'll be also putting the replay on chain.net tomorrow. So if you want to ask a question to Peter, you can just click on the question mark button. That will open up the live Q&A tab on the right side of the screen. You can also see all the questions who have been posted up to now for Peter. Maybe you can close, or maybe you can keep your slides for now, but just in case you want to refer to some of the points. So let me take those questions one by one, and I will put them on screen so everybody can see them here. So first question is coming from Yanisa. She's asking, was the shift to recycle materials mainly driven by consumer pressure, investors, or just internal values?
Yeah. So I think it's a combination, and it was not so much of being pressured because we couldn't communicate anything that we were doing this while we were certain that we were able to realize it. So it was also a combination of when back in 2020 we said, okay, we're going out and we're going to do this, that it was in line with the strategy we just announced in terms of driving the sustainability, where you can imagine that it's important if you want to do something like this. It's also helpful that you're then the first mover, because of course that also brings the biggest impact of making this transition. So it was less of a real pressure by investors. It was not that the shareholders asked us to do it, but obviously under the umbrella of what we're doing from a sustainability agenda, this helped to explain where are we moving towards. And that's same of what's currently happening. It's not that we now have made this transition of silver and gold and stop. We continue to explore what are other materials we can actually drive moving forward. So it's I would say here to stay to drive the sustainability agenda.
When Pandora got started back in Denmark many years ago, were they already famous for having sustainable jewelry, or?
No, and I think that so sustainability really became the first time that it was an essential part of our strategy, core foundation, called out in our strategy, was with the introduction of our Phoenix strategy, which was launched in 2020 after the reorganization. So
I see.
company-wise, we grew very fast towards 2018, had a turnaround, and the new strategy actually said we want to have a sustainable growth. And sustainability, given our customers and our customers' profile, became an important part of our strategy.
Okay, interesting. All right, thank you for this question. Let's move on to the next one. All right, it's coming up. Another question from Sharon here. How do you verify that the recycled silver and gold you source are really recycled? Good question, yeah.
And this is actually the main part of why it takes the time it takes. Because from a manufacturing perspective, nothing changed. Silver or non-recycled silver, it's the same. But it's indeed very important that you make sure that your entire value chain is documented and audited. So the first step we set is very stringent requirements, which means there's a lot of requirements in terms of your documentations, proving that you know where you're sourcing from. Not only us buying from refineries the silver grains, but the refineries in their turn need to prove that wherever they source their materials from are coming from scraps. So the whole audit trail of showing what they are buying, the value they are buying, the volume they are buying, is that right? Can we prove that we're really using recycled silver? Then the second thing, what is also the reason why it takes time, is that there's no difference between recycled and non-recycled silver when it comes to the materials. So you can't visually segregate silver, non-recycled. So the only way to assure that we are only producing with recycled silver and not by accident have non-recycled is that we need to segregate our production lines. Now, as I said, internally, that's very easy because we can say we have inventory, we completely deplete it, and anything what we buy from that moment onwards, we know that it's audited and it's recycled. So anything what we produce is by default then with recycled silver. For our suppliers, it's a bit more challenging because they serve both Pandora, but they also serve other customers which are not asking yet for 100% recycled. So there we had to spend time and work with our suppliers. How in their operations did we make sure that they can prove that the machines they are using are only used for recycled materials versus non-recycled materials. And that's also one of the reasons why you see that there's a slightly additional cost because you add more documentation trail in making sure that you can claim it being 100% recycled, as well as in your operations, you have a bit more work to make sure that it's segregated.
It's interesting because I think I'm not sure about Asia, but in Europe, the entire recycling of jewelry is actually you have specialized business, right? So there are a lot of people who have old jewelry from their parents or grandparents, and then they actually sell it, and this become recycled, and then it goes into certain suppliers who are well known to kind of manage this. But Asia probably it's a different thing, right? Do people actually recycle old jewelry in Asia? Not so much, right?
I mean, right, from a sourcing of scrap, it's of course a big market, but I mean, there is reasons why we source only from European suppliers at the beginning. Yeah. So we work with European refiners because they were right also ahead on the journey of becoming audited recycled refiners. Yeah. Now, gradually, we work with them to bring the sourcing and the refinery processes closer to our manufacturing base in Asia. But there is a reason why, as I said, sourcing of the silver, as well as working with suppliers based out of Europe, was the starting point of making sure we could make this transition happen.
Makes sense, yeah. Okay, all right, thanks. Okay, let's move on to the next question. Is using sustainable materials making products more expensive for customers? Good question. Yeah.
So we haven't done any change in our costing of products because of introducing sustainability. So, and it's also not that it's right, significantly more costly, but the small increment of cost, we kind of absorb that internally with our continuous improvement program. We have like any manufacturing operation. So no, it's not passed one-to-one to our consumers when we did the introduction of recycled silver and gold.
So sustainable gold and silver are more expensive than the original one, right?
It's slightly more expensive because of, right, as I said, the value chain is a bit more complicated to organize, not that much. When you look at lab-grown diamonds, of course, it's a sustainable product which comes at a much lower price point than the natural equivalent.
Okay, all right. Let's move on to the next question. How do you measure your carbon emission in your supply chain logistics? Any tools?
So we are also in the journey of becoming better and better in making sure that we use more automation to keep track of that. What I would say is that if you look at the way we measure our carbon emissions, you go through a few phases of maturity. So kind of the first step of maturity is that you say from a certain material, we know what is kind of the carbon emission per kilogram. If we buy 1,000 kilograms of this material, these are the emissions we omit. That's kind of how you do it. So based on the amount you buy times the generic carbon emission factor, that's the amount of emissions you emit. Then the next step is that you start working with your suppliers. So you become more accurate of not using a generic material emission factor, but you start to understand the operations of the supplier and what is their emission profile, how that translates into your profile. And then the last step is that you really start looking at product by product, and that's what we did for the diamonds, to completely understand all the steps you take into your specific value chain, to then contribute how many emissions do you account to the products you are buying. So for a company like Pandora to, for instance, say, now we produce lab-grown diamond and it comes with the same emission factor as a jeans. We, of course, in the back end need to make sure that we prove that everything is audited and from an emission factor is calculated in a great level of detail. And that's also one of the challenges, I would say, by going out and claiming these sustainability claims from a supply chain perspective. It adds a layer of not complications, but it's a layer of check if you want to change, for instance, your suppliers. You can't just simply jump from one supplier to another if they are not able to adhere to the sustainability claims we already have communicated externally. And then in terms of tools, yes, I mean, right, we're also looking in terms of automation and systems, how we can make sure that we can automate this process of collecting and monitoring this information better and better.
Okay. All right, let's move on to the next question. We have quite a number of them still coming. Do you control all your assembly manufacturing when making jewelry?
It's in-house, we do roughly 90%. So in that sense, we control the majority of our manufacturing. But of course, what we don't control is the scrap of materials and the refinery, the initial refinery process. So that's outsourced, as well as some of our components we outsource with other jewelry manufacturers.
Okay, interesting. Let's move on to the next one. How did you convince your suppliers to switch to recycled materials without raising cost?
Yeah, so that's also coming from a perspective of skill. So if you have the skill which Pandora has, it's easier to say to your suppliers, we are on this journey, and starting in 2020, by 2025, we expect that you, together with us, are making this transition. So you can also tell your suppliers, if you are not able to make this transition with us by this time, then of course it becomes impossible for us to work with you. So it's also important for yourself to make sure that you join us on this journey. Now, how we, of course, make sure that we help our suppliers is that given the skill and the size we have, we also have the resources and we have right? Our teams worked with our suppliers to understand what they need to do, how do they need to change their processes and operations to make sure that we can claim using 100% recycled silver and gold. So it's a combination of we have our skill, which helps to make sure that suppliers know they need to join us on this journey, as well as we have the resources to actually help our suppliers to bring them along on this journey without having too much costs increased. Of course, as I said, there is a slight premium we pay for using recycled silver and gold. And in that smaller premium, you cover the cost our suppliers have because they have additional work of proving that they use 100% recycled silver and gold.
And have you also kind of evaluating how they operate? I mean, having recycled materials is one thing, but having sustainable operation and manufacturing with a site, the energy consumption, human labor conditions and so on. Do you also monitor this?
Yes. So basically all the suppliers we work with, and then the main suppliers in terms of components, right? We ask them to, before they start working with us, to adhere to our code of conduct, which also includes that together with the supplier, we want to make sure that we can also see their operation, so we can also audit it together with them, how they operate to ensure that they stick to the standards we have set. So yes, we have full access and visibility to the operations of our suppliers.
And I guess in Thailand, it's probably easier because the entire jewelry industry is quite mature, right? So it's been, Bangkok and Thailand in general is well known for making good jewelry for quite some time already.
Correct. And I think it's also different industry by industry. If I look, I worked a time in the electronics industry. I think it's slightly different of getting easy access to all of your suppliers. In the jewelry space, I would say it's quite common to be relatively close with your suppliers in that sense.
Yeah. All right, next question. What lesson did you learn from scaling lab-grown diamonds in Asia? And do consumers care and like lab diamonds now?
Yeah. So I think we are not yet selling lab-grown diamonds across the 100 countries where Pandora is selling their jewelry. And one of the main reasons is actually this. We are primarily operating in the US and in some European countries. And that is also because the consumer preference we see is not there yet. So I think in the US, it goes very, very fast in terms of what people are expecting or right understanding on what is a lab-grown diamond. We are not operating in other countries, so I can't say it with 100%, but I'm pretty sure that understanding and perception of what is the value of lab-grown diamond and how to compare it to naturals will be different in other countries around the world. It's a bit similar to the perception of silver and jewelry or jewelry plated products. That's different in Europe and America, which are our core markets, versus markets we see, for instance, in Asia.
Okay. All right. Next question. So most of your supply chain manufacturing is Thailand centric. So why are you adding Vietnam now?
Yeah. So at the time of announcing our new strategy, we also had a growth trajectory which saw that our current manufacturing base had not sufficient capacity. So we had to kind of expand our capacity. We did an evaluation of globally, and we came with a short list of 27 countries of what would be a good infrastructure to potentially put a new factory. And then we shortlisted the remaining countries. We ended up adding Vietnam for the reasons of, one, we didn't want to add a fourth factory in Thailand. And that was also in the time of COVID. You can imagine that having 95% of your manufacturing, everything out of one country, that adds also from a shareholder perspective, the concerns about, but what if something happens with Thailand? That's one. Two, Vietnam has a very good jewelry manufacturing infrastructure already. So it's also easier to ramp it up there. And then three, from a regional perspective, we are now able to have a manufacturing base in Bangkok, which can also serve, think of planning, procurement, who can also serve the plant in Vietnam. So, for instance, Mexico was also in the shortlist to consider, but that adds the complexity of how do you combine whatever happens in Mexico operation-wise with the operations we already have in Thailand and Bangkok. So that were one of the main reasons of why Vietnam.
And I guess from a supply chain risk point of view, having two locations makes sense, right? I mean, Bangkok has been flooded. We saw recently some earthquake, so you need to kind of diversify to make sure that you're reliable. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to the next question. Does Pandora contribute any incentive to the supplier for transitioning to certified recycled sources, or is it becoming part of a contract clause with suppliers?
So it is eventually part of a contract clause, but it's not. We did not do it in a way of take it or leave it, and that's where I think the jewelry is also a different industry compared to what I've seen in the FMCG and the electronics space. You can actually work with your suppliers and bring them on this journey. So we gradually did it over the years together with our suppliers. Now the interesting spin-off we see is that because some of our suppliers joined us in the journey and started to segregate their operations between non-recycled and recycled production, some of their other customers started to ask our suppliers to actually supply 100% recycled materials. So it also helped our suppliers to elevate their operations and actually be able to offer recycled products to their other customers.
Okay, interesting.
And that's kind of an incentive in that sense.
Okay. Next question. The question from Tara is, how do you handle logistics and traceability when exporting from your main sites in Thailand? Do you have a global 3PL for it?
Yeah. So I think when it comes to the traceability, what's important is that from sourcing your scraps into your refiners and then coming to our production sites and our suppliers. As soon as the product leaves our facility and goes to our DC and the stores, we don't have to track it because we know for certain that it's 100% recycled silver and gold. So not so much on going outside of our main sites, but more our inbound flows. We need to make sure that from a documentation perspective, we can segregate and assure that we are using 100% recycled silver and gold.
Okay, and from an outbound logistic point of view, I mean, you work with one 3PL to serve the entire world, or how does that work?
We work with multiple 3PLs. I think most companies will do. We tender on an biannual basis. I think the big thing, if you look at our volumes, I mean, it's relatively small product. So the first time I walked into our main warehouse, I was shocked how small it was compared to FMCG.
Yes, of course, yeah. It's probably very tiny compared to what you can get from other brands.
I mean, all outbound is by air freight, so I mean, it gives a sense of how small from a volume perspective it is.
Okay, so you're not a big client for a 3PL, right? I mean, you can be, but in terms of volume, it's not much.
No.
Okay.
It's more from our global DCs to our stores. We have 7,000 stores. That's where the 3PLs play a part.
Okay. Do you think your ambitious sustainability commitments are giving Pandora a real competitive edge against all your competitors? That's a good question.
It's a very interesting question, and I'm pretty sure you will get different answers to depending who you ask within Pandora. Because our sustainability and communications team has done an assessment, and the logic there, they say, is there's a lot of benefit to us because by doing this, not only are we driving a sustainability agenda and a commitment towards 2030 of reducing our carbon emissions, but you also kind of generate brand awareness on top of it. So, right, you can say instead of having to kind of invest in brand awareness, you get it through your initiative you are doing. Then there's a second thing. Also, Pandora has sustainability-linked loans, which means that if we are achieving our sustainability goals, there is some benefits in terms of financial loans we have with banks. So, right, reaching this ahead of time is also giving us some advantage there.
Interesting. Okay. All right. So I think we have one more question. Let's take this. Role of 3PLs in your sustainability efforts. Yeah, you mentioned earlier that you're using a lot of air freight. Obviously, air freight is now the most sustainable way of shipping products, but you don't do a lot of volume. So how do you, what's your strategy with logistics?
So I think if you look at, so logistics is a very small part if you look at our entire carbon emissions. So from a Pandora group, we commit to reduce 50% of our scope 1, 2, and 3. But besides manufacturing and logistics, there's also a lot of emissions, energy consumption in our stores. If you have 7,000 stores, I mean, you also generate a lot of emissions there. But also in other fields, I mean, we do a lot with marketing, and that also generates a lot of emissions. So I think first things first, logistics is not per se the main driver of a lot of emissions from a Pandora group perspective. Of course, what we're now doing is we are on track with our 2030 roadmap, but we still have a long way to go to make sure that we realize our 2030 ambitions. So we start exploring also with our logistics provider, green fuels, right? What is possible there? What is the trade-off? What is the emission reductions versus the investment we need to do? Is this the smartest investment from a carbon emission reduction perspective, or do we have in other areas bigger opportunities with less investment required to bring down our emissions?
Okay. All right, we got one more question very quickly. Let's take it 1 more minute. Have you had to cut suppliers who were not able to meet your level of ambition, could not source recycled material, for example?
No, I can't remember if we had to really let go of one supplier because they were not able to do. I think suppliers definitely required the time to make the transition. So again, it was not something, right, ask and a month later, here we go. But we didn't eventually have to let go of a lot of suppliers. Not only because of the sustainability transition.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Peter. It was very interesting, excellent presentation. Lots of good question from our audience as well. I want to thank all of you for watching and listening to that discussion with Pieter Pennings from Pandora. And again, if you missed part of it, the replay will be available tomorrow on Gen.net. So thank you again, Peter. We look forward to see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.